Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss, and I'm really grateful you're here to be part of this movement to redesign wine around ecological knowledge. Thanks for listening. And a special thank you to all of you who support this podcast in various big and small ways, all of which are vitally important to making it possible. If you value this podcast, please consider subscribing to our Patreon as a primary way to support. The link to do that is always in the show notes. And please, everyone, for free, join our email list. You can join the list, check out my always growing recommended reading list, and see other ways you can support at beyondorganicwine.com. Do people read anymore? I'm just curious. Does anybody read? I listen to most books. I do read, but I mostly consume audiobooks, I guess. Okay. So I want to issue a small correction. In my intro last week, when talking about the French study which purported to examine the drought tolerance of various varieties of vines, I said that Cabernet never gets grown on its own roots. And I was informed by Paul Vandenberg that there are growers in Washington State in the U.S. who grow Cabernet without rootstock. If you don't remember Paul, he's a previous sponsor of Beyond Organic Wine, or his winery Paradisos del Sol is, and he's a legendary Washington wine grower who grows what may be the world's only no-spray vinifera vineyard. Washington is, to my knowledge, the furthest north region on Earth with a hot summer Mediterranean climate. Maybe that slips up into the southern part of the Okanagan as well. I don't know exactly where these climate lines cut off. It's also very arid much of the year in parts of Washington, and the right kind of soils to discourage phylloxera in some places. And presumably there are other places around the globe with similar climates and soils where Cabernet is in fact grown on its own roots. But of course, the majority of the Cabernet on the planet is grown on rootstock, so really this is just a lesson to me not to ever use the word never. I'll never say never. But the rest of my critique of that study still stands. But thanks, Paul. I really appreciate this kind of feedback. If you ever hear anything that you think I need to fact check myself on, Paul is really good about this. There's several other things I've been wanting to bring up that he has mentioned. Just hasn't always been appropriate, but things like this just makes me a better, journalist, better, truth seeker is the way I like to put it. And I really appreciate the feedback, and I like interacting. So, the email for me is connect@organicwinepodcast.com. And, of course, join the email list. And speaking of Cabernet Sauvignon, this episode is a bit unusual for me, I'll admit. My guest is Laura Barrett, and she's been the winemaker at Clif Family Winery in Napa for over 10 years. That's Clif with one F, and if you have heard of Clif Bars, it's the same family. I met Laura when she was on a panel I moderated for Napa Green earlier this year. She has some really great things to say about working for a B Corp, which the Clif Family Winery is, and the farming that they do at Clif Family, which has been organic from the beginning and is now introducing regenerative practices. None of that is out of the ordinary for me, of course, but then the majority of the interview becomes a technical, step-by-step discussion of the process of making top-tier Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. If you haven't been listening to the podcast, you might not know that Cabernet has been my primary example of a global monoculture run amok, and that Napa Valley represents the epicenter of a problematic dominant vinifera-culture in the Americas to me. But having said all that, there are a few other perspectives that I'd like to acknowledge. First, Cabernet Sauvignon is just a grape variety. It's not its fault that some humans have fetishized it and planted it everywhere. And to be honest, it's a pretty sturdy grape as far as vinifera goes. It's not too disease-prone, not too finicky, and can take some weather extremes and still produce tasty grapes. And damn it, it can make some pretty delicious wine too. I mean, there's a reason it's the second most planted grape on Earth. What it represents doesn't mean I can't appreciate its beauty and positive qualities. The same is true of the idyllic Napa Valley region. its beauty and its desirability are why it has become such an unaffordable place to grow and make wine for most people besides the very wealthiest. Also, this episode is unusual in that I'm not featuring a natural winemaker or, low intervention winemaker or whatever. I don't like to use these terms, but instead, talking to Laura, we explore what I would consider to be the epitome of spare no expense technical winemaking today in 2025. We're talking optical sorters, glycol jacketed, temperature controlled tanks, programmed pump overs, ML inoculations, and the whole shebang, including Jesus juice. Though I might not opt to make my wine this way, the process fascinates me in both a journalistic and a historic way. And Laura readily admits that this is one of the many ways to make wine. It just happens to be the current industry SOP for some of the highest priced wines in the world. And Laura shares some really practical technical winemaking knowledge and tools that could help you or inspire you no matter how you make your wine. The truth is that I care very little about how someone makes their wine. What you do in the cellar is a personal and philosophical choice, or sometimes a logistical or economic choice, but it doesn't really impact me. I can choose to drink your wine or not. I can opt out. This is why I don't often record winemaking episodes. It's not, high on my priority list. On the other hand, I care very deeply, and it is of the highest priority to me how you grow your wine. What you do in the vineyard is an environmental choice with global impacts, and I can't opt out of your treatment of the earth. We're all on the same space boat. So I'm really glad to feature wineries like Clif Family, who are farming in a way that protects and enhances the health of our earth while also taking care of their employees and community. Enjoy. Oh, and hey, I wanted to mention I was interviewed for another podcast, the Sustainable Wine Growing Podcast, and the episode that featured my interview came out June 5th. If you're listening to this, that was just last week. I'm really happy with the interview. They did a great job of editing out all the bad bits to make me sound great. And I'm really grateful for them for putting it out. Craig McMillan is the interviewer, and the episode is titled Beyond Foxy, the Case for Hybrid Wine Grapes. So check it out, Sustainable Wine Growing Podcast, Beyond Foxy. I hope you like it. Enjoy. Laura, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me. It's good to chat with you again.
Yeah, we met at the Napa Green panel on the 2024 vintage, where you represented essentially, I guess you represented Napa for the 2024 vintage at that panel. Can you talk about where you are and what you do for a
Yeah,
bit? Just like an
absolutely.
introduction? Yeah.
Sure. So I am the winemaker for Clif Family Winery. I have been in this role for a little over 10 years now, so fairly established in what I do. And Clif Family Winery is owned by the original founders of Clif Bar and Company. And
Right.
some people take a pause when I say that, and I have to then say the Energy Bar Company. So they made
Yeah.
Clif Bars in the East Bay here in Northern California for 34 years. They started in the late 90s and built an incredibly successful and amazing business, both Kit and Gary. Um,
Yep.
and then simultaneously started the winery in 2004 in the North Bay in the town of St. Helena. So they
Nice.
built this really nice business that we have a hospitality hub on the main street in St. Helena. We have 90 acres of certified organic vineyards. 80 of them are in the Oak Knoll district of Napa Valley, which is just north of the city of Napa. And then the other 10 are up on Howell Mountain, which is one of the first AVAs established in the 1980s in the Napa Valley. So definitely different sort of mountain versus valley floor. And then up on the mountain is their home. And in addition to a 5-acre organic vegetable farm where we have an orchard and we grow row crops and many, many other things to kind of service our food program down here in St. Helena, which is a food truck that we serve lunch and all sorts of delicious foods from the food truck, as well as a pantry. We have a line of pantry items. We make sweet and savory preserves and hot sauce and chocolate bar, nut mixes. We make a line of honeys. So, all sorts of delicious pantry products that come from our business as well.
Yeah, as somebody who lived in Colorado and spent a lot of time mountain biking and rock climbing in the 90s and 2000s, I'm very familiar with Clif Bar. And yeah, I'm sure I ate my fair share at that point as well. um, I, yeah, and I wanted to ask you a couple of things, even just based on what you said. I have heard these various regions within Napa described by the tannin profile in Cabernet grown in those regions. Can you talk about that? Are you familiar enough with that? Do you taste these differences in your own production?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like we pour wine at the Napa Valley wine auction every year, and it's a barrel auction, and I always show Hell Mountain Cab, and people say, "Oh, this is so Hell Mountain." You really people do know their AVAs. They the very sophisticated wine connoisseurs and experts certainly do. I would say that I would classify them as mountain versus valley and
Hmm.
east versus west, because the western side of the valley gets a lot more fog than the eastern side. So if you know you're
Mm.
dealing with mountain fruit, you have really concentrated fruit and high tannin level, but you have riper characteristics, fruit characteristics, you're going to be on a mountain side in the eastern side, which is Hell Mountain. Maybe like Atlas Peak is the southern end of the valley. And then on the west side, you get a lot greener characters, because you're typically covered in fog for a lot longer than we might be on the eastern side. So something like Spring Mountain or Mount Veeder might be a little more Bordeaux in style, a little less ripe, a little more sort of rustic. So I think you definitely can identify the little microclimates within the Napa Valley if you've tasted through everything and you understand the weather patterns and the soil differentiations.
That's fun. Have you tested yourself with like a blind tasting of your?
Yeah, I mean, we typically focus on our own AVA. When we do blind tastings, we'll do all of Howell Mountain. So that would be a really fun activity. I haven't done that in a long time, where you look at a different one, try to pick out the
Yeah.
AVAs. I think I'd get a B plus.
Nice. All right. Good. That's
Yeah.
good. That's modestly confident. I love that. And Cliff Family is it's a B corporation, the Cliff Family Cellars or Cliff Family Winery.
Winery. Yes, we
Is the B
achieved B Corp certification in 2022.
and what's it like? Because I have known people who have started these, but what's it like being an employee in a B Corp?
Oh, what a great question. I mean, the B Corp certification is a lot about how you treat your employees. It's a huge part of getting certified. So one might assume that, many people who work at, a B Corp certified company are very happy and well cared for. And that is certainly true of us here at Cliff Family Winery. We have a big staff, and we are all really, really happy in what we do, and how we're cared for and how we're respected and regarded in the positions that we serve in. So and it's a proud moment too. I think we're all, not only are we happy with our jobs in the business that we work for, but that we're very proud to be here, and we're
Uh-huh.
proud to work for a company that has that high achievement.
And you've been there over 10 years, so it must be terrible.
Yeah, I started in November of 2014. It's a really interesting process to take over a winemaking position. You're inheriting someone else's work, and but immediately, kind of, you're the new face of the business. So even before your wines are on the market, you're representing the product, and so there's this waiting period where you're waiting for your wines to actually reach the consumer's glass. So it's really fun and really interesting, and I had a great time. But it took, for a while there, I was waiting for that 2015 vintage to be in the glass, and then it happens quick on the white front, a little slower on the red front. But yeah, super happy. I love my job. I have a lot of different projects that I've been working on, and Kit and Gary are, innovators and have really cool and fun, exciting ideas, and always bring something new and interesting to the table. I think for us as a business, um, we're always kind of pivoting with the times, and maybe even a little ahead of the curve sometimes. And that's a lot of fun to be involved in those projects that involve some creativity and thought and research and development. It's been a great experience.
Can you talk a little bit about the organic values as well that they've had and that are embodied in what you guys are doing there in terms of the farming for everything?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that story starts a long time ago in the Clif Bar days where Kit and Gary wanted to build a business that had great values that they believed in. So they talked about it originally as building a business that had more than one bottom line. And of course, that one bottom line that exists in everybody's business is profit. Um, so they wanted more than that. They knew that their people needed it and that they needed it, and it was important to them. So they built this business model that they call the five aspirations, or otherwise known as their five bottom lines. And that is sustaining their people, the planet, the business, the brand, and the community. So we've always had those five pillars. And when they built Clif Family Winery, of course, we brought that business model to the winery. Um, so organic ingredients were a huge part of the development of the Clif Bar and what differentiated them at the time. Um, and so we've always farmed organically here. The property and the farm that started small and got much bigger over the years has always been certified organic. And when I came on board, Kit and Gary had just recently, maybe back in 2011, 2012, had purchased two properties on Howell Mountain and converted them to organic. And then of course, when we purchased our new property in the Oak Knoll district, which was much larger, much more substantial project at 80 acres, that was planted and farmed organically from day one. So that is really a value that has always existed here at Clif Family Winery. And then adding on the people and the community piece is just how we've built the business over the years. Our tasting room is a local community hub. People love to visit. We have so many regulars, and almost one of our biggest wine clubs is our locals, friends and family, industry based club. So the B Corp certification really was a very natural fit for us. We had already been doing all of that work for years, and it was just a
Yeah.
matter of getting it down on paper, maybe having more um, learning how to write it down and talk about it, and really define what we were doing. Was what B Corp took. What it took for us to get B Corp certification. It wasn't like we had to start doing all these new things. It was a very natural
Right.
fit for us.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know that, and we're going to get into, you are kept pretty busy with winemaking tasks, but but to what extent do you get out into the vineyard? To what extent do you drive, vineyard management practices in order to determine what's coming into the cellar and what you get to work with?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to say that I'm not necessarily a trained viticulturalist. I don't determine the spray schedules or, any of the real fine details. We have a vineyard management company that we work with that fulfills all those roles. Um, but I'm pretty involved in vineyard management at sort of a higher level, directing decisions that we believe impact quality. So, like this
Can you
time
give
of
an
year,
example? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I
Sorry.
mean, I think
Yeah.
all the regenerative farming practices that are new, people are talking about a lot more now, and we have established in the last few years, such as moving to a less tillage of the ground, more permanent cover crop, and animal grazing, having bird, bee, and not sorry, not bee, but bird and owl boxes on the property for rodent control and sort of canopy pest control, as well as having sheep in the vineyard in the spring for grazing. Those are some of the examples of some of the regenerative farming practices that we have established, especially at our new property in Oak Knoll, um, that I really do believe improve soil health, create a natural opportunity for vine balance, and definitely combat, some of these weather crises that we've had over the years, such as heat spikes and maybe frost or fire and wind. And, I think it all kind of works together to improve our odds for harvesting delicious grapes.
Nice. Yeah. You work with contract grazers, I take it, or a contract grazer for the sheep.
We do. Yeah. We
Yeah.
work with a
Nice.
contract grazer, and the goal is to get the sheep in for 2 passes before bud break. And
Got it.
we use them for a mowing, obviously 2 mowing passes, natural fertilizing, and um, it's been a really great experience. It feels good too. I mean, to see the animals in the vineyard, and we often have moms and babies, so the lambs are being born, and there's a shepherd that stays on the property full time and moves them and keeps tabs on the weather and how fast they're grazing, and really does an amazing job. And it's um, really incredible to see how quickly it works too when done properly.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I love the energy that comes from from those from the life being in the vineyard.
Yeah.
So so here's a question for you. Has there been a time when you've requested a change in the farming for a specific flavor, something that was happening that you were noticing in the wines, or anything like that that you can give, like that was like, hey, whether it was about ripeness or whether it was about, just phenolics of certain kinds, more or less, anything like that, that I'm just curious. It's more of just a
Yeah. Yeah, I have a good example there where it's kind of like, so a winemaker comes into the vineyard and says, "Oh, I really want to do this because I want the wine to taste like that." Um, it's a really interesting conversation to have with your viticulturalist, because they like it. They it's almost like a task for them. And they get to think
right.
about their and dig into their toolbox for all of
Yeah.
the things they've learned over the years. So one example that I have is we are making a new line of wines that's called Vino del Pranzo, and that
Yeah.
means lunch wine in Italian. And these are our lower alcohol wines. And so I was making the red Cabernet, and the goal was to make a 12.5% alcohol Cabernet, which is challenging in the climate that we have in the Napa Valley, where it's a lot warmer. I mean, in Europe, you have some cooler areas where that's normal, but here, normal ripeness usually it gives you 14, 15, even plus
Yeah. Yeah.
percent alcohol. So I
Yeah.
had to think about how I wanted to do that. And one of the requests that I made to the vineyard management company was to remove the wings. So when you have a cluster of cab, you often have this little offshoot at the very top, that's almost like a little secondary cluster, and we call it a wing. And they're usually
Right.
between 1 and 2 bricks lower in sugar. And you might think that that's what you wanted, but I was really worried about I needed to know that the sugar that I was getting was consistent. I wanted true consistency and ripeness, because I didn't want I was trying to achieve ripeness at a much lower sugar. So I wanted to take the wings off so that I could really have an even ripening throughout the season, and know that everything was falling in that one ripeness category or range. So that's one thing that we did in the field, and I think it really
How
helped in defining, getting the clusters where I wanted them to at a lower sugar, and defining exactly the right point for harvest, because it was really critical.
Yeah, so that's yeah, you were looking to keep it low alcohol, achieve, sort of fruit flavors less than the sort of green pepper pyrazine flavors, because we were talking cab, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and so And that worked out for you? I
It
imagine that's
did.
one.
It did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
we've had a really successful launch of this brand. I made the wine in 2021. And again, we just launched the 2022 along with a white wine, a Sauvignon Blanc from the 24 vintage. So, really exciting new project. I just poured these wines at a wine event this weekend, and it's amazing how interested people are in tasting and hearing about this project. And even having people come up to my table and say, "Do you have anything a little lighter?" It's like people are really looking for
Nice.
these
Yeah.
wines right now. So it makes me really happy to know that we're ready. We have them in bottle and they're ready to go. And that's thanks to Kit and Gary's great idea back in 2021 when we started this project.
When are you gonna come out with the Vino del Colazione, the breakfast wine?
A breakfast wine, right? That's great. I'll have to bring that one to the table. I like that name.
Yeah, just fit with the, you've got a whole program there. Um, well, how many wines are you making, Laura?
Oh goodness, I lost count. I usually say between sort of 15 and maybe 18 SKUs every year, but I think it's probably more than that now. Um, we have been a primarily direct to consumer business model up until this last year or two, where we
Okay.
have, most of our wine being sold right out of our tasting room through wine club, e-commerce, and just visitors. And so that just means that we weren't relying on national distribution for the majority of our sales. Um, and so we started with this business model and with this wine club model. We were making a lot of different wines in smaller quantities so that when our wine club members got a shipment, it was something different. And we were shipping 4 times a year. And there's only so much Napa Cab and Napa Chardonnay that people want to drink and have in their cellar. So we were looking for just unique wines and something different to keep our wine club members interested and engaged. And so with that, that was kind of the starting place of where we got into making so many different wines, and then we just saw a lot of great opportunities. For example, we have an artist that we partner with who lives in Miami. Her name is Reina Noriega, and we partner
I
with
saw
her.
that.
And yeah, she designs the label. And I make the wine, and then now and first you start with a red, and then of course you need a white, and then comes the rosé, and before you know it, you've added 3 SKUs to the portfolio. But it works for us because we have, and now with the new vineyard, we are definitely selling more in the national market. We have new distributors in on the East Coast in New York and New Jersey, and so we have more wholesale partners now. But it's still so fun to have all these different varietals. We make a Malbec. We just grafted over some red grapes in Oak Knoll to Rhone whites, and it's just so refreshing to work for a business that's willing to try new things, especially during times when the wine business is changing and maybe people's drinking habits are changing a little. And um, uh, 10 years ago it was just all about Napa Cab, and we need more Cab. And now things are a little different, and people want refreshing whites and lower alcohol wines, and it's just really fun to have all these projects. So I love having this really diverse wine portfolio. It keeps me super engaged and really interested, and I have fun doing these little projects. Um, and it also is fun for our salespeople who are get the chance to sell something unique and different. Um, but then we also always have the staple. We have a really great Cabernet program, both from the valley floor and up on the mountain. We have delicious Chardonnay. We have a great Sauvignon Blanc program. So we still have all those core wines that are, sort of, historical in the Napa Valley. But we're also doing a lot of really cool, fun things on the side.
Yeah. Do you have?
And then you wrap in the food piece, and then you really have
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the real.
Yeah, that sounds well, it doesn't sound like you have a problem. It sounds, yeah, like just a lot of fun. And it is really nice. I say that as a joke because I've talked to other people who are like, I've been like, how many SKUs do you have? And they're like, yeah, we have a problem. um, just because it's more like an obsession with trying new things and experimentation and stuff like that. But it sounds like actually a nice, reasonable amount that keeps you interested, but also allows for a lot of sales diversity and on the marketing side and everything for the on the sales side. I I
Definitely.
I I mean, because you are such a winemaker and because you have such broad stuff, I wanted to dig into that, of course, with you. And I I guess I was gonna ask you what is your favorite wine to make, and maybe I could ask you that, although I'd be shocked if you. Well, I don't know. I would love to hear your answer to that, but also I'd love to know what's like the most challenging wine for you to make.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
Two part question there.
Two-part question. Okay, so my favorite wine to make, I mean, that's a tough one. There's so many
That's what I
wines. You know,
thought.
it's
Yeah.
everyone always compares it to choosing your favorite child, which no mother
Yeah.
would ever do.
Well, and I
A
don't mean
wine.
like what is your favorite wine, because like they might all end up being these things that you love in just in different ways. But in terms of the actual process, is there a process that you enjoy more than the other, or do you just enjoy, I mean, you don't
I
have to.
think
I'm just throwing that out there. So
Yeah, I mean, I usually answer this question with rosé winemaking because
really,
because it's number one, it's very predictable. So there's like an aha moment, and it's so defined as far as like when it happens in the winery, where you harvest your rosé. You might soak it on the skins for a little bit to pick up a little more color and flavor. You might destem versus whole cluster press, and then you do a nice cold fermentation, and then it finishes, and you add a little bit of sulfur and let it settle out. And then that moment where it's kind of settled and it's clarified, and you stick your nose in the glass, and it's like, there it is. There's your product, and it's so consistent.
mm,
And every year when I smell the rosé after it's finished fermentation, it's so satisfying, and I feel so proud and so happy. And it's just this moment where you have this clear understanding of the process and what you do. And you can make these little tweaks along the way, and they make very kind of small adjustments and small changes to your product. But you have the opportunity to recognize that this is like Mother Nature. This is like growing the grapes and yeast fermenting the wine, and then or fermenting the sugar to make wine. And then all of a sudden you have this like absolutely aromatic, beautiful product. And it's just a really satisfying moment that sticks with me and stands out year after year after year. And the
mm.
other piece that I love about rosé is that it gets in the bottle really quickly. And even before the springtime comes, when is your very like stereotypical rosé drinking, weather, we have people that are drinking our newly released rosé, on Valentine's Day in our tasting room on a freezing cold, rainy, wet day. And it's like, it's so fun. It's so sort of counterintuitive, and it like sort of the wrong time to drink rosé, but because it's so good and people are so excited to have that fresh, fruity product in their glass, people want it. And it's satisfying to also then see the consumers enjoying it really quickly. So that's like the instant gratification type piece, where like, I've just made this wine and now look at these consumers enjoying it and raving about it. So it's just a really feel good kind of product.
Yeah, I like that. And unless you're like
Yeah.
me, and then I aged my rosé for a year in barrel, and
Oh,
it wasn't as
yeah.
good. But I mean, just a totally different thing. But of course, it's. I think yours is the better strategy.
Yeah,
I
I always like to say that I like to drink rosé right off the bottling line. That's the
Nice, yeah, yeah, right off the
Yeah.
press if possible. Um,
Right.
um, so well, I don't think I've been wanting to do a little something about Napa Cabernet for a while, because to me it's such the quintessential thing, but so much um it like so much what I don't even know what the word is. So many resources and so much attention is showered upon it in most cellars in Napa. I'm wondering what your process is for making like your top line Cabernet. I'm sure you have multiple different SKUs of Cabernet, but let's say your like highest end Cabernet. Would love to know the full process from soup to nuts on that one. If you're willing to
Sure.
talk about it, unless
Oh
there's like,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
No, I mean, we all, this business is very, is built on collaboration. We all talk and exchange, ideas and thoughts. So there's nothing that's really sort of proprietary here.
Yeah.
So for me, I'll talk about how Mountain Cab,
Great.
and that's an interesting place because I have two vineyards that are at about the same elevation on the mountain, but they're on opposite sides. One's on the south
Mm.
side, which we call Cold Springs, and that's, you know, um, adjacent to the Napa Valley side. So where the fog layer sits above the Napa Valley, this vineyard is just right above it. And then the other vineyard is called Croquet. And if you travel up and over the top of the mountain and down the other side, you're going to land right about the same elevation. But now you're in the area of exposure to Pope Valley, which is kind of the internal valley that's much warmer and never sees any fog.
Ah,
So these two vineyards are drastically different. One of them, I would pick the warmer one on the north side around September 15th to say the 20th, 25th. And then the Cold Springs one on the Napa side doesn't come off the vine until October 15th, 25th, sort of right
wow.
before the, it's like the last thing I pick when you might get a rain at the end of the season that just kind of settles the dust and is no big deal. And then you have your real harvest ending rain where you're done. You've got to get it off. So Cold
Right.
Springs comes in right before that harvest ending rain, whenever it might be, and so to see those two lots come in and
And
how they're handled.
I'm going to interrupt you probably throughout and just ask you some nitty gritty detail stuff. But
Sure.
so what informs your pick decision?
So it's really flavor. I mean, I monitor sugar and acid throughout the growing season, throughout the ripening season,
Hmm.
but I'm never really picking off of sugar. The sugar gets to a point, like at the Croquet property, where it's a lot higher,
Hmm.
and maybe the tannins don't taste quite ripe and the seeds aren't quite ripe, but you still have high bricks. Well, I'm not going to pick it because I have high bricks. So it's not the
Hmm.
defining piece, but it's definitely one piece of the puzzle. I don't
Hmm.
really have to worry about acid on the mountain, meaning that I have too much. Sometimes you have too much acidity and you're waiting for that to come down. But
Hmm.
that's not really an issue up on the mountain either. Typically have a relatively high pH, low acid juice.
Okay.
So really, it's about flavor, and the tannins are super important on Hell Mountain because they can be really aggressive. You have these stressed vines. It's all volcanic soil where you don't have a lot of water holding capacity or nutrient holding capacity. So the vines are smaller, and they really don't bear a huge amount of fruit. So the berries are small, and if you think about like a tiny little blueberry, you have a lot of skin and not so much juice as compared
Yeah.
to like a table grape where you have a lot of juice.
Yeah.
So tannins are really what I'm focusing on in the skins and in the seeds. So I want to make sure my seeds are ripe, and the best indication of ripe seeds is color. They want to be brown instead of green, and also how they separate from the pulp. The seeds can kind of get tied up inside the pulp and they don't separate easily, and that's an indication that the grape is not quite ripe. Um, so really, tannin
Do you
is
find
what
that
I'm
true
focused.
across your varieties that you work with, or is that specific to Cabernet Sauvignon?
It's true of most of all varieties. I think you don't focus on it as much with whites because
Okay.
you're willing to pick a little less ripe.
Okay.
But pretty true across the board for reds as far as like an indication of ripeness and a tool that I'm using to determine ripeness.
Okay.
Um, so
And are
then,
you?
and then,
I'm going to ask you one more question.
yeah, go for it.
Really digging in when you're tasting. And you're tasting so you're eating fresh grapes, so there's some translation that's happening in your head where you're sort of like you have familiarized yourself with tasting these grapes over multiple years, so you kind of know where they will what kind of wine they will become, but obviously it doesn't taste like the finished wine exactly. So when you're tasting tannins, for example, what is that mouth sensation like? What do you experience that gives you the sense that they're ready, like,
Yeah,
or
with tannin, I think it's more about texture than flavor and how they
hmm
feel on your palate. Underripe
right.
tannins can be really bitter and dry, um, and and also you can kind of feel it like when you're chewing on the seeds, you want them to be crunchy and crisp almost, and when they're green and chewy, they're not quite ready.
hmm
But in the skins, when you chew on the skins and you really feel, it's more about the feeling of the tannin on your palate. Um,
Yeah.
and there's definitely flavor components in there as well that you're looking for. But
Sh- yeah, I meant like what is that texture that you're looking for when you're chewing?
yeah, I think you're looking for something that's just, I mean, you're always going to feel the tannins on your palate, but maybe something that's just a little softer and not so pungent, if that's the right word,
Okay.
or dry. So something just a little less aggressive. It's a
Okay.
hard thing to describe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I'm totally putting you on the spot. I
Yeah.
appreciate you going
No,
through
that's
this with
okay.
me.
Hmm.
um, so cool. All right. So now,
Yeah. So
please proceed.
Yeah, so then once the harvest, and also I wanted to say that there's a lot more than just how the grapes taste that goes into a harvest decision. I mean, I think a winemaker would love to say, "Oh, we're going to pick it when it's at
The
perfect
perfect
ripeness."
time.
That's really not true. I mean,
You're
we
dealing
have a
with the
lot of,
weather and dozens of acres
yeah.
of vines over multiple regions. Like, there's so much variety. There's so many logistical concerns that come into play. I know. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an
It's
important
like,
piece because there might be a red flag warning, and it's really close to ripeness, and you just don't want to take the risk that the power is going to go out and there's going to be an evacuation and you're not going to be able to get to your vineyard. So there's real things like that now that we have to
right.
think about. And there
Yeah.
might not be a tank available this week, but there is next week. So by golly, you leave it out for a few more days because you work at a custom crush facility and there's no tank availability. So there's a lot of different things. There can be trucking issues, or your vineyard management company can pick on this day and not that day. So it's really hard to schedule a pick because it's a moving target and you have to put all these pieces together, and then all of a sudden you find your perfect day and that's it.
Can you explain a red flag warning for non-Californians?
Oh, sure. So we get a lot of wind here in October. They come from the eastern region, and they bring a lot of warm wind. They call them the Santa Anas in LA. So we
Yeah.
have our version of that up here. And when we have high winds, they will just issue a red flag warning, which means it's going to be windy. And with wind comes down power lines and power poles, and the threat of wildfire. So we're
Yeah.
all becoming very well versed in how to handle it. Our firefighting, efforts have drastically changed over the years, where there's fire management is so much better.
Mhm.
But you can't really fight the winds. Really, are what caused the trouble.
Yeah. And so that might be, for example, you're getting close and you're like, "Oh, maybe we should wait another few days," and then you get a red flag warning, you're like, "No, let's pick tomorrow."
Bring it in. Bring it
Yeah.
in. Yeah, and that's okay. It's part of the process. We're dealing
Yeah.
with nature, and it's part of the story. Really, it's part of the vintage. And these wines taste the way they do because of all of those little decisions that culminate in the final product. And there's not one right and wrong way or thing to do. And that's what makes the craft so interesting and unique and different from year to year.
Yeah. Great. So anything between that and getting to the crush pad.
Yeah, so no, just,
Okay.
early morning or night pick. So we
Okay.
usually pick in the dark.
Okay.
So it's cooler, and we can get the fruit in. If you start your pick at 7 a.m., then you're still picking at 10, and then it's too warm. And so we pick in the
Yeah.
dark and haul
Yeah,
the
most people
fruit
don't
to,
realize like September in California is like our hottest month. Like August and
it's so
September is
hot.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's so
so yeah,
warm.
yeah, the nights are luck fortunately in California the nights cool down quite a bit, so it's yeah, it gives you that ability to let the grapes come back down to a reasonable temperature and then get them off while they're at that temperature.
Exactly. Yeah. And then when they land in the bin and they land on the sorting table, they're still intact and they haven't sort of dejuiced before you want them to. So we dump them onto the sorting table and have the ability to take out anything that we don't want, like leaves or, and any clusters that maybe are imperfect. We have the chance to to sort. And then it goes into the destemmer where we remove the berries from the stem and just the juice, the seeds, the stem, the juice, the seeds, and the berries go into the must pump, and then they get pumped into the tank.
Are you
And
doing optical sorting?
yes, we have an optical sorter after the crusher, and that is brilliant. It works
After, you mean
quickly. I
after
mean,
the destemmer or
sorry,
after the
sorry.
crush?
Yes, after the
Okay.
destemmer. My
Right.
mistake.
Okay.
After the destemmer, and that is really a great piece of equipment that removes. It's also a vibration table, so it removes like the little bits of stem that might come out that are lighter weight that come out the other side, and really cleans up the must. And it's fast, so
Right.
there
Yeah.
there are opportunities where you can be hand
It's,
sorting out little bits and pieces like that, and then it really sort of takes away from the efficiency of the operation. So
and so like
um,
that, just to describe that for anybody, like essentially every single berry gets scanned and like approved or denied entry into the crush bin, essentially.
yes, I mean that sounds so perfect, but yeah, I guess that would be a good way to describe it. Um, yeah, it's just a way, our way of making sure that only the very best. There can be sometimes what we call little shot berries, and those are little tiny
Right.
green berries that don't ever develop or ripen. Mostly stem, little bits of stem that comes out when you're picking really ripe. The stems are brown and really they're ripe, and so they break off, and so just little bits and pieces, and some of that, there are people that are whole cluster fermenting, so I try not to be too fussy about a lot of that stuff because there are so many different ways to make wine, and it's that back in the day we didn't have all this equipment and delicious wines were being made, so the equipment is a real improvement, but we also have to have I try to keep a very realistic viewpoint on what we're doing, which is a very natural
Totally.
process.
Yeah, nothing that you say. I don't. I'm sure you don't intend to be judgmental about like this is the best and only way to do it. But what you're saying so far sounds really aligned with many like what I would consider cult cabs are made. I mean, like the best and most regarded cabs in Napa are sort of made this way. I would say it's
Definitely.
this is standard operating procedure for a like the highest end Napa cab. And
Definitely.
so
Definitely.
not that you can't do it 100 different ways, but this is yeah, this people are using these technologies, and yeah, and that's kind of what I want to hear about is just this because it is kind of unique. Like I mean, a lot of you go to places that aren't as well funded as Napa, you're not going to see as many optical sorters as there are there, or as many of the other technologies that not as much fine attention to these and down to the minute berry quality detail like that, because it's a matter of resources and scale too, and so yeah, but I think this is a really unique and interesting thing for to learn about, and just in terms of
Yeah.
yeah, like what you guys do. um
Yeah.
so please, okay, so you've now got all these optically sorted beautiful berries off stem, and you've got a whole bunch of them. And
Yeah.
are they so this is your first day, so this is crush. So are they then going into yeah, so what's next? Yeah. Let's
So
where
then
do
they
they go?
they get yeah they go into a large stainless steel fermenter,
Okay.
and depending on the lot size, it can be anywhere from like 4 tons to 13 tons. That's kind of the range of tank sizes we have at our winemaking facility.
Hmm.
And what I do is I cold soak for about 3 days, which means
So
that I basically maintain the temperature of the juice because we've picked at night. So technically it should be coming in about 50, 55 degrees. So I turn the glycol jackets on to 50 degrees and keep the juice, or what we call it, must, at that point, because it's juice and skins and seeds. Keep it cold for 3 days.
And at that point, it hasn't been through. You've just put whole berries in, right? So no crushing at this point, like
Well, I
no
do.
intentional crushing, or do you
Yeah,
crush?
sometimes I crush. It kind of depends. That's a decision I make on a lot by lot basis.
Is that
Sometimes you
how do
don't
you?
need to.
Yeah, is that?
Because,
I was going to say, does are you, when you crush, essentially you are extracting more tannins, extracting more everything, but definitely more tannins. So I imagine you do less of that when you felt like you have a pretty tannic wine,
yeah, I mean,
or
I think
is
ultimately the berries are going to get broken open,
right,
unless you're intentionally trying to do like a carbonic maceration, which is, sorry, a carbonic fermentation, which is you're actually fermenting inside of a whole berry, which you would handle the processing in a very different way for that.
right,
But for
right,
me, I will often crush, which just means you add like a little piece of equipment underneath the destemmer that actually just breaks open they're like rollers. They like kind of roll the berry, and you
right,
can you
right.
can have it roll tight or open or none at all. But the process of destemming really can break open the berry enough to release
Right.
the juice. And then through pump overs and whatever your fermentation management strategies are, which I'll talk about next, will further that. So sometimes there's really no need. But if you're trying to extract early, then crushing is a great tool, because then you have more juice, and you can start extracting in more of like an aqueous water
Hmm.
environment than an alcoholic environment, which I really like.
Yeah. It's like softer, right? It's gentler. It's less extractive, essentially.
Yeah, because you don't have alcohol on your side to further the extraction and take out more. And it gives you just a little more control at the end when you do have that, and maybe you want to get off the skins early when you're already at, say, 12 or 13% alcohol, and then finish your fermentation off the skins. So there's a lot
Right.
of different strategies, but um, fermentation. So once I cold soak, the reason why I cold soak is because I want to be sure I have an accurate sugar measurement. So you can imagine on a large scale, and if you have a 10-ton fermenter
Hmm.
that's filled with juice, the little sample that you pull out of the sample valve might not be representative of the whole tank.
Right.
Imagine
But
that.
after a few
So
days, you might
after a
get
few
more.
days, and then you have the
And are
chance
you
to
are you
mix
doing any
mix
pump
the.
over at that time, or is it just literally sitting at 50 degrees and
Yeah,
nothing?
no, I pump over once a day during that, just
Okay.
just a few minutes, and just to get enough mixing that you're moving things around and you're able to get a representative and accurate sugar measurement, because we make a lot of decisions off of that first sugar analysis, that first juice analysis. We want to
Right.
know what the bricks are so we can determine our final alcohol, and if we're going to have a too high of an alcohol, we have the opportunity to add a little bit of water to dilute enough to get to a reasonable finishing alcohol.
Do you
We
have a name
might
for that water that you add?
the Jesus juice.
Yeah. That's what I thought. Just checking.
Yeah, it's a really
Turning
important
water
thing
into wine, right?
in turning water into wine. Exactly. Um, so I think it's really important to to take that moment and really carefully make some
Yeah.
decisions about how you're going to
You
modify
and
your juice if you need to.
might you adjust the with tartaric or something like that if your pH or acid
Yep.
levels are out? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and you really want to look at all the acids, because if we have a
Mm.
starting pH, and we
Hmm.
also have we look at malic acid, because the secondary
Yep.
fermentation, which we call ML or malolactic fermentation, we're going to convert that malic acid to lactic acid, which is going to further increase our pH.
Right.
So if you have a lot of malic acid, you might want to account for that and think about how
Right.
that's going to be in the finished product.
Right. And
So,
do you inoculate for I forgot to, I mean since we're at this point I mean maybe you're about to get to that. But yeah, cuz you're looking at the juice right now. Um go on, sorry. I shouldn't have
Yeah,
interrupted.
yeah. So that's okay. We're looking at the juice analysis and we make a bunch of decisions, and we're also looking at the nitrogen available nitrogen in the juice. So that's an indicator of how much sort of food we have for the yeast. The yeast use nitrogen for fermentation process. So we have all these numbers that we determine the additions that we're going to need during fermentation. So at that point, I use I inoculate with commercial yeast, and the reason why I do that is because I work at a custom crush facility where we're making wine with maybe 5 or 6 or 7 other customers,
Hmm.
and house yeast might not be my yeast. You just don't know what you're dealing
Right.
with, and there's grapes coming from many different vineyards, and
Hmm.
I like to just have a little bit more control over my fermentation. And
Hmm.
I don't necessarily want to, I have a certain amount of time allocated to me for each fermenter that I fill. So we're allowed to be in the tank for about 2 weeks, and so I just
Mm,
need, have to take these things into consideration. And I
gotcha.
like, also, there's a lot of great yeast that you can buy out there that guide you in a certain direction and give you a certain aromatic profile, or you can
Do
kind
you,
of hone in on some of the real details of your finished product.
do you have a sort of house yeast that you love, or do you use a blend, or what's your approach to inoculating?
Yeah, it's really by varietal. I have certain yeast that I love for specific varietals.
Okay.
And so sometimes it's like just the ability to finish. Like for
Yeah.
cab, when you're picking ultra ripe cab, it's at peak ripeness. You got to finish your fermentation. It is the number one priority. Um, so, you have yeast that you really, they're going to finish, and and then for Sauvignon Blanc, it's a little different. Like for me, aromatic profile is way the most important thing for choosing a
Mm.
Sauvignon Blanc yeast. So it really depends on the varietal.
Let
I
me.
when
Yeah. Go ahead. So do you
back in
go ahead. Sorry.
back in the day when I was making Gewürztraminer, and I wanted to leave a tiny tiny bit of
Mm.
residual sugar, I chose a yeast that was kind of not so tolerant of high alcohol, so it would kind of slow down and finish really slow because it's struggling,
Mm.
and I
Right.
wanted that so that I could have
Right.
it slow down, and then I could sulfur it at a very specific amount of sugar to leave at the end.
Gotcha. Yeah. Are you adding sulfates at crush as well, just to sort of add that control level as well?
Yeah, a small
Okay.
amount, especially when
Yeah.
I'm cold
Yeah,
soaking.
because
I
you're
want to
cold
make sure
soaking
that
for three
nothing.
days. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
are you
temperature is usually good. It's usually cold enough that nothing will start, but just a little bit. I'm really, as a farming organically and trying, using the word organic on our labels, we are trying to keep our sulfur additions to a minimum.
gotcha? And do you two other questions. Do you when you choose to use water, are you also then bleeding off and getting some Saignée juice away from that to account for that addition?
Yes,
Or
I do
okay.
that. I do that.
Okay.
And I think it's really, really important. You can
Yeah.
significantly alter your juice to skin ratio, which can drastically change your extraction.
Right.
So it's the nice thing about
Is it
a
a
red
1-to-1
fermentation.
bleed when
Um,
you do that?
yeah, usually you
Okay.
just take off if you're adding, 2% water, you take off 2% juice just so that you get back to your original starting point. I mean, some
Gotcha.
people choose to concentrate at that point and take off a little more, and that's definitely a
Mm,
tool that some winemakers are using, and some people choose not to choose just to add the water and not do a bleed because they get more volume. So, it doesn't, or they think it doesn't matter. They're trying to make a lighter style red wine. Um,
right.
so there's all types of ways to handle that water add if needed at all. Sometimes we don't even need it. Like my Cold Springs cab ripens pretty slowly and it's a cooler site, so I rarely have to even add any water to that tank at all. So there's all types of varying scenarios at that point at the juice stage.
Nice. And do you inoculate for ML?
I do, but I don't
Okay.
co-inoculate. I don't add it at the same time as I add the
Oh.
yeast. So what happens is we inoculate for fermentation, primary fermentation, which is the conversion of sugar to alcohol. And then carbon dioxide is the byproduct, which is an important component of the extraction method. So then once your fermentation starts, because you're producing carbon dioxide, all of your skins rise to the top of the tank, and all of your fermenting juice is down at the bottom. So you want to try to connect the juice back into the skins to get more color and tannin and flavor out of the skin. So we have two ways we can do that. We can pump over, where we pump the juice from the bottom of the tank back up over the top, and we have this little, what we call an irrigator. It's like a little shower head, and it showers the juice back over the skins. So you
Mm-hmm.
get extraction that way. Or you can punch down. So if you're in an open top fermenter, you can have either mechanized or by hand. You can push the skins back to submerge them back into the wine or juice. And that's a way to get extraction. And so back to sort of your original question about managing tannins, and
Right.
this is like, and mountain fruit, this is the critical component in how we're crafting the finished product. So if you
Right.
want a really, really high end, deeply colored, dark, tannic, really concentrated Cabernet that's meant to see a lot of new oak and age in somebody's cellar for several years, then you want to make sure it's really, really extracted and big and meets that. If you're trying to make a lighter style cab where it's a little softer, a little more elegant, a little more drinkable and approachable at a younger age, you might not pump over for as long or as
Mm-hmm.
frequently or use
Right.
as warm. Then now we have temperature on our side as well. So when fermentation gets going, not only carbon dioxide is produced, but heat is produced. And we want more heat in a red fermentation so that we can extract more from the skins.
Right. Are you doing once a day or more than once a day?
Yeah, on Hell Mountain Cab, I'll usually do shorter pump overs 3 times a day. So I keep it
Oh, wow.
moving.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and the beauty of one of the most amazing things about our custom crush facility is that we have automatic pump overs. So there's actually
Oh,
a
man.
pump. Yeah, it's a true luxury. There is a pump attached to the bottom of every single tank. And so it just
Oh,
gets
wow.
programmed. Now, there
That's,
are downsides to that because if you set it to go at 7 a.m. and you're not there, or and something goes wrong or it's not working, you have no way of knowing. You still have to be very present and really be
right.
watching and paying attention. Um,
Yeah.
but it is
Mechanical technology
automated.
can malfunction, right?
Exactly. Yeah, but it is automated, so it allows us the opportunity to do this frequent, shorter amount of time. And I also change the number of pump overs per day depending on what stage of fermentation I'm at. At the very end, I might only pump over for 1 minute once a day just to keep it on the skins and let it finish, but I don't really want to extract any more tannin.
So, and you already mentioned it, but this goes on for until you're close to dry, but it sounds like you like to press while still a little sweet to go to barrel.
Yeah, not
Okay.
necessarily because I want it in barrel, but because I get to a point where I say, okay, there's enough tannin here. I'd like to get it off the
Right, right,
skins.
right,
Yeah, and then usually I would, if I can stay in tank, I would love to do that because then you have temperature control on your side. So if it slows down, um, and you can just keep it warm, and then it will finish quicker. And then it goes. But sometimes the tanks are usually quite scarce during harvest. We need to fill them pretty quickly. So typically you do go to barrel very shortly after pressing and finish in barrel. But if given the opportunity to stay in tank, I always take it because I know temperature control is extremely valuable at that point in time.
right. Yeah. So, are you trying to control the temperature at all during that fermentation once you stop the cold soak, or do you just sort of turn off the glycol at that point and let whatever
No,
happen happens? You're
yeah,
still, yeah,
I'm still monitoring. It's super
yeah.
important because it'll get to over 100 degrees and then all your yeast will die from the heat, and
Right,
then you'll
right.
end up with a
Gotcha.
stuck
Yeah,
ferment.
yeah,
So
yeah.
people get pretty, Napa Valley wines can be made with pretty high temps. Like I see people going all the way up to 95.
Okay.
That's borderline for me. I usually 92 is about as warm as I'll let my tank get. Sometimes 95, yeah, you can extract more, especially if you can do that early before you have a huge amount of alcohol. But 95, you risk a stuck ferment. So I try to be
Right.
a little on the safer side, and I feel like I do think I can get what I need at 92. Um,
Yeah.
and then some other wines, like I make Rhone blend, so Grenache and Syrah, and I do not want those hot. Max temp on those for me is like 82 or 85.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the white wines, it's the opposite. It's like, how cold can I go? Not how hot can I go? Um, yeah,
Right.
so it's a temperature control and uh, timing and frequency of pump overs is the critical component to making Napa Valley Cab.
Well, and this cab that you're describing. So how would you describe what you're going for stylistically? What is the finished product? Are you going for that rich, concentrated, more tannic style that people can age for a while? Are you going for, the opposite of that, or somewhere in the middle? What's your aim
The
stylistically?
Howell Mountain cabs are definitely full extraction, big, concentrated, deeply colored
Right. Yeah.
Cabernets. They
Yeah.
age in almost 100% new oak for 22 months. We bottle age them for a little over a year before we release them to our wine club. And then we recommend that our customers then bottle age it for anywhere, like I would say 3 years, absolute minimum. Um, 5 to 8 kind of is ideal. Like I'm drinking, right now, I think the 15s and 16s from Hell Mountain are phenomenal. So,
Nice. So
but the
you're
17s
but
aren't, they're not ready yet.
so you're just releasing like the 22s this year,
Exactly.
perhaps. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. But
But not
then, for
recommending that
example,
people drink them. Wait,
right.
wait.
No, not yet. Not yet. I mean, you can, they'll be delicious, but they'll be
Right.
better in 5 or 7 years.
Yeah.
But like for example, my low alcohol program, that Cabernet, it comes from the valley floor, not from the mountain. But that one, I am only leaving on the skins for maybe 4 or 5 days. Just not. I mean, I do the cold soak and then ferment for a much shorter period of time, much lower temperature, because the goal there is to make a lighter wine, both in alcohol and in tannin. So
Right.
I have complete control over how much tannin I extract from the skins. It's totally in
Right.
my hands, and I get to make that decision based off of the wine the wine, the finished product, and the product we're trying to deliver to the customer. And then, my personal preference obviously comes into play quite a bit too, but I have a really good understanding of what the customers are looking for and what the expectation is of that particular wine.
Right. Fun.
Yeah.
So when you go to barrel, you're going to 100% new, it sounds like, or almost 100% new. You've got 22 months at least. And what happens during those 22 months? What kind of élevage treatments do you do?
Uh, So early on, when the wine goes to barrel, then it will get inoculated for malolactic fermentation,
So that's when
and
you
then
inoculate. Okay.
yeah, once it goes to
Gotcha.
barrel, and
Yeah.
once I know that it's sugar dry, you really it's in it. It's better for the wine to finish primary fermentation before you start secondary. Um,
Why is that?
well, if you finish, what happens, the yeast and the bacteria compete in funny ways. You really don't, sometimes people will co inoculate and co ferment, and it works out great. But if you have ML completed before primary, you can run into some VA issues. VA stands for volatile acidity, which is basically a spoilage. Um, it's a byproduct and it's an indication of spoilage, but it's also a very natural occurring byproduct in both primary and malolactic fermentation, but more so in malolactic fermentation. So if you complete ML first and you have a high VA, then the VA is toxic to the yeast and then the yeast won't finish. So
Mm.
it can just
So
get
are you
a little
d-
complicated.
and within VA we have like acetobacter and ethyl acetate. Which do both of those potentially get exacerbated, or just one or the other? Just curious. I
It's
haven't.
yeah, mostly acetic acid is the one
Okay.
that
Yeah.
we worry about. You can get ethyl acetates. as well, but it's mainly the acetic acid.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I typically inoculate in barrel once I know I'm pretty close to being sugar dry.
So
And
that's individual barrel inoculation. That's a lot more work than if you just did it in tank and then filled barrels, right?
yeah, well, yeah, I could if I'm in a position to do that. That's best case scenario. So it can
Okay.
if it can all be added to tank, mixed, and then put down. But some people like to do it in barrel because then you know it's equally distributed. If you don't
Oh
get a
yeah.
good mix, and then so
Right.
there's
Right.
people
Yeah.
have preference. Different winemakers
That's
have
yeah. That's
preference
a good
on that.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I do a lot of stirring during this time, so a lot of lees stirring because the wine is still fermenting, so you have a level of sort of carbon dioxide protection.
Oh yeah.
So because stirring is a very oxidative process, so I
Right.
know I have some CO2 still in there, so I take advantage of that, do a lot of stirring, really try to develop the mid palate through lees suspension, and
Autolysis. Yeah.
it gives you a lot of kind of mouth feel and texture,
Mhm.
and then we monitor ml, and that can take, I mean, I still have one lot going through from 24 that's just being really stubborn. Sometimes it takes till
Yeah.
the spring. You have
Yeah.
to go through the
Yeah.
cold dead of winter, and then when it warms up again, these things come alive.
Yeah.
They finish.
Yeah.
um, and then once the malolactic fermentation is finished, then your red wine is complete, and you can add SO2, make sure everything is sort of stopped, and then it begins to settle out. And at that point, we usually do a what we call a post ML racking. So
Okay.
we'll take the wine out of barrel, clean out the barrel, and get rid of some of the primary, what we call primary lees. So that first real sludgy settling of solids, and homogenize everything, maybe adjust the free SO2 to a level that the winemaker is comfortable aging, and then put it back to barrel. And then you really want to, I just like to let it be at that point. It takes a little time for the wine to kind of recover from the racking. So I like to just let it settle and sit. And then it's just really monthly topping at that point. So I taste the wines once a month, and
Mhm.
the wines get topped up. The barrels get topped up. And then we start to think about blending, which is
Yeah.
really what I'm very busy with blending right now in the 24s.
Yeah. Fun. Now, I forgot to ask, do you do anything like microoxygenation during fermentation during that process?
Um, Sometimes, if I have hydrogen sulfide present, so
Okay.
which is sort of a yeast stress factor. So if the yeast don't
Right.
have enough nutrients, they put off hydrogen sulfide, which is like kind of a rotten, eggy smell. So if
Sure.
something's a little stinky, we have a couple of options. We can do what we call a tub and screen pump over, which means that instead of pumping the wine directly from the bottom of the tank up and over the top of the tank, you would pump it into a big tub, and you can splash it. Um, so it gives it a little bit of air, and then you move the wine from the tub back over. So it's kind of an intermediate step where you can give the wine a little bit of the ambient aeration. Um, our other choice is that because we have these pumps that are in line at every tank, we have a little valve that we can open, that we can just suck air. So it's more like a Venturi style.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so that's what I'm using, and I'll
So
usually
it's
do that
more
kind of
problem solving rather than proactive. We want to infuse,
aerating. Yeah,
aerate, yeah, and like
yeah.
create a
For me,
tannin tannin management situation kind
yeah,
of
it
thing.
depends on the wine. Sometimes I program it into my pump overs right at peak fermentation very intentionally, just to give it some
Hmm.
air, blow off
Okay.
some any yeah. So sometimes I'll program it in intentionally. I try not to do it towards the very end of fermentation, because then you have a very delicate finished wine in your hands, and I don't really want to introduce a lot of
Right.
outside yeast, bacteria, whatever might be in the air. So especially if you have a lot that's kind of been picked late, or it's been a stressful end of the season where you may have had a heat spike, or um, sometimes I think it's best just to not use a lot of air, because the wines have already maybe been exposed to a little bit more yeast and bacteria than you may have wanted. And so it's really microbial control. But those decisions are made, on definitely on a lot by lot basis.
Gotcha. Okay. That's sounds like a fun process. Anything else? Did we miss anything? Did I forget to ask you about anything?
Oh, I mean, that pretty much covers it. Then the blending, then the winemaker has to decide just how many times you're going to pull the wine out of barrel and put it back in. Some people like
Right,
to do it
right,
every 3 months. Some people don't like to do it at all. And they
right,
make wine in a very reductive environment where they're not exposing it to a lot of air.
right.
And those decisions are all kind of personal preference for the winemaker, wine style, maybe lees health. If the lees are really healthy and they smell great, then you can use them and to develop mid palate. But if you've had kind of a weird fermentation and they're kind of stinky, you want to get rid of them and get off the lees. So really case by case basis. Um, and then once the wine is blended, then you might do a little bit of fine tuning at the very end, and then pull it up to tank just right before bottling, and then off you go. Sounds so
Yeah.
simple.
Well, yeah, I mean, blending
Not
is
really.
yeah. That whole process is yeah, it's like art and science combined. I mean, it's yeah, that's and there's so much personal taste to it too, so much palate
Yeah.
personal palate
And
preference.
one thing I learned over the years is that, there are thousands of decisions that we make every single day,
Mhm.
mostly during harvest. And then they become a little less frequent as the finished wine ages in barrel. But sometimes the very best decision is to do nothing. So you might
Yeah.
think, oh, I should change this, or sometimes wine moves and changes so slowly. Sometimes the best thing to do is just wait and see, and then reevaluate. So that's why frequent tasting finished wines is the most important thing to do, and really getting to know the wine and how it's changing on a month to month basis, um, before you really jump and act on something that you might want to change. So
Yeah.
requires a lot of patience and commitment and attention to detail.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that post ML rack, and then do you do any racking after that, or just topping? That's it.
I'll do um I'll do a rack to blend.
To blend,
Um
right, right.
yeah, so
But that's at
basically
the
on my
very end of yeah, right?
yeah, so on my
Okay.
early reds, the red wines that bottle are like after only 15 months in barrel, like
Uh-huh.
Zinfandel for example, that will get a post ML rack, and then it will, and if I can make a blending decision at that point, I will do so. And then I will really only bring it out one more time. So it really only gets two rackings in 15 months. The
Okay.
cabs usually get one more, usually get three.
Okay.
Um, I just think they need a little bit of air, and sometimes um, you know, you want to have the opportunity to homogenize and taste everything together as one, because there can be so much barrel variation, especially when you have you have all this new oak and they're different using different coopers. It's really nice to be able to taste everything as one and try to make a decision on any final, 1 or 2% or 5% additions at the very end, right prior to bottling. Um, so I like to homogenize one last time before I make any decisions.
Thank you so much for going through all that. I really appreciate you going through that. That's great. And
Yeah, you're welcome. It's fun to talk about, and it's nice to be able to share some of the technical, side of winemaking.
yeah, I like it too. And as a this is maybe just a fun question, and you don't have to answer this really long, but for anybody who's, in the learning phase, what's like the worst mistake you've made while winemaking?
Oh, the worst mistake. Well, I mean, I haven't done this personally, but the worst mistake that can happen in the winery is, as I described, sort of during the extraction method, when you're pumping over, the worst thing you can do is suck wine from the bottom of one tank and pump it into the neighboring tank. it's it's a really easy mistake, and it happens every year, and it's a real problem because sometimes,
Then
you're
you
making, sometimes it can be white wine next door. you know so that's the worst thing that
Oh,
can
that's great.
happen.
It can also be somebody else's tank next door, right? Probably sometimes.
Exactly. It
Oof.
can be a real disaster. Yeah.
Oof. Wow. Um, the value of Napa Valley Cabernet and Half Mountain Cabernet for sure is pretty astronomical relative to what people think of the cost of grapes being. So something like, I mean, something, I mean, I'm not saying that you've told me this at all, but if people are harvesting, for example, from Tocolone, they're paying like 50,000 a ton for Cabernet from Tocolone. Um, just to give people listening like a sort of sense of the cost of Napa Valley grapes. That's the high end, but it can be pretty high. So you guys probably are very careful about every single drop of that wine. Do you, like with your Saunier, what do you do with that? Do you sell that? Do you use that in rosé? What do you do with your Saunier?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, back in the day, I've tried to make rosé out of it. And rosé, because it's pink juice, which is what we make rosé from.
Right,
But when you take Saunier juice from a red fermenter, you've harvested and you've made your harvest decision for your finished red wine. You
right,
have not you have not picked juice, and you don't have juice that's going to be delicious for rosé, which
right,
is, excuse me, low sugar and higher acid.
right,
So rosé made from Cabernet Saunier juice, excuse me, can be really, really um, not great rosé.
right,
So um, what I do with it is just we have a lees collection um, service that takes away unwanted. They take away lees, which is can be technically filtered, and you can get juice out of it or wine.
right,
So we just put it with that, and then it gets sold by the gallon at a very low price, of course, but that's the best way for us to
yeah,
dispose of it. For us, it's definitely just part of it's a loss that's part of the process, but overall not really a loss because we've added back that volume, so we're not seeing a shift in our cost of goods because of it. I know some people that will collect it all and then put it on skins that have been finished, right? So if you press a red tank and then you're done
right,
with those skins and they go into the compost bin, I mean, there's always more, there's still color, there's more pigment in there. So you can then technically pump it onto um, finished skins and try to color it up a little and then maybe sell it on the bulk market. Some people do that, which is brilliant and a great way to recoup some of the cost. But
right. And I mean,
it's
isn't
also
this how we end up with some of the mass-produced Napa Cab wine, where it's actually these Seigneurs and Lees and things like that blended with like Lodi skins, and then you, if the percentages are right, you can end up with a
a Napa
75%
cab.
Napa
Yeah, I mean,
Cab.
maybe. I don't really know anybody that's doing that, but I think just to sell it as, it's still not necessarily that they're putting it on like cheaper skins, but that they're putting it on their own skins. They've just already been fermented and they've gotten what they
Okay,
need out of it for their highest
yeah,
end wine. And just a way to make a wine, turn a wine from pink to red so that you can sell it for kind of a nominal price on the bulk market.
right,
Um, and that's a really cool strategy. I would love to do that because that to me would be like, of course, a cool science experiment. Like, how can I make this taste really, really good and delicious? The
right, right,
issue there is that it's hard to keep it stable because if you can picture it, you've harvested like this lot on this day and you have 300
right, right,
gallons that maybe, and then a week later you have another two. So how do you keep the juice cold and not
right,
fermenting and
right,
homogenized? And so it in my scenario, it doesn't work because um, I just logistically I can't make it happen. But if someone had their own facility and they had a tank that they could keep feeding juice into for a week until they had a sort of a critical mass, and then could do this process, that would be, I think it would be super cool. I would love to do that because then again, it's a challenge. Like, how can I make this taste really good? Or um, anyway, so
yeah,
but for us, just kind of disposing, I think
yeah,
making a rosé out of it is not the best choice for the rosé.
right. Well, and I mean, I didn't ask about your background, but you're a chemist by training, right? Originally, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
I mean, it's so long ago now, but I do have an undergraduate degree in chemistry,
Right,
and
right.
So I studied chemistry in college, and then I have my master's degree from UC Davis in viticulture and enology. Um,
Right.
so I always like to say that I feel like the science background helps me problem solve and helps me really kind of have a clear understanding and path for how I look at things. I don't necessarily use like the details of my science. Um, Obviously, understanding microbiology is critical in winemaking,
Mm.
but otherwise, I think it just helps me think scientifically about some of these things, which is really important, both when you have a problem and just when you're making decisions about what you want to do with your products. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you again. It's fun. I love talking about this stuff, and it's been a while since I've had a good technical winemaking episode. So this is a highlight. Thank you. It's really
Awesome.
fun.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah, it was great to reconnect and happy to participate and
Yeah.
fuel people's interest in winemaking.
Yeah. And can you the so Clif Family, that's Clif with one F, CLIF family.com is the website, right? Where people can find
Yes,
out more
Cliff.
and
Hmm.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
we have
So
an amazing
anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, we have an amazing website. I think we have well, of course, there's all of the products, wine and food that you can explore. But one of the most exciting things that we've done recently that you can also read about on our website is, we all talk about wine club, but we launched a subscription wine club, which is basically just really flexible in that someone can go on and sign up and you can choose the frequency and the number of bottles and the wines that you want to put in your shipment. So it's really a very loose wine club model where you can really tailor it to your needs and exactly what you feel like drinking at that time. And it's called the Wine Drop. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting things that you might read about on our website.
All right. Very, very fun. Cool. Anything else?
That's all. Yeah, we covered a
All
lot of
right.
great talking points here. Thank you for the good conversation.
All right. Definitely. Thank you very much. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I want to thank all of you who support this podcast through donations, Patreon subscriptions, sponsorships, or just posting a great review and telling a friend. You make this podcast possible, and I'm honored and humbled and inspired by your support. If you'd like to support this podcast, you'll find links to all the ways you can support it in the show notes.